For the past 16 years, Chris Bird has been the director of Alachua County's Environmental Protection Department, or EPD. An environmental engineer by training, Chris is a board member of the National Association of Local Government Environmental Professionals. He is currently a technical advisor to the U.S. Local Governments for Sustainability effort in their development of national standards for sustainable communities. Previously, Chris was president of the Florida Local Environmental Resources Agency and a member of the U.S. EPA's Local Government Advisory Committee. Welcome, Chris.
Good afternoon.
You know, Earth Day is right around the corner, and I was chatting with you and Sean McClendon the other day, and we thought this is pretty good timing to talk about, you know, what happens every day at the county, particularly in your department and Sean's, but really across the board in so many ways. So why don't we start just by tell us a little bit about the genesis of Alachua County even having an environmental protection department.
Well, Mark, I think it does tie in really well with the upcoming 40th anniversary of Earth Day, because that long ago, back in the early 70s, all across the country, really, there wasn't much of a framework for dealing with environmental problems. And the original Earth Day really brought a lot of national awareness to some of the problems that we had back then. Fortunately, a lot of those problems that we were dealing with back then, a lot of them have been straightened out pretty well. But I think that if you look at Alachua County's decision back in the mid-70s to establish a local, back then they called it Pollution Control Agency, and leading up to where we are now with the Environmental Protection Department, a lot of it really ties to that original Earth Day and the awareness and the momentum that came out of that effort.
And just so I can understand, does every county, do the 67 counties in the state of Florida all have environmental protection departments?
Well, actually, in Florida, most of the coastal counties and a lot of the more metropolitan areas, their counties provide similar services to the Alachua County EPD. I think the last time I looked, it was about 70% of the state's population was located in counties that provide similar services. Florida is pretty much on the cutting edge in terms of local environmental programming. There's a few states like California and a few others that really have this much of a capacity on the local level, but Florida is somewhat unique.
And you took over as director of EPD when?
Well, I think it was 1994. Yeah, that long ago.
Seems like just yesterday. And I know it's got a strong kind of grounding in what you were talking about that goes on at the national level, but what is the focus of EPD now? Tell me about programs and different focus.
Well, I think in some ways we're continuing to do what we started with. I think in Alachua County, because water is so important, a lot of our emphasis has to do with water resource protection. And I can rattle off a lot of the programs and services that we provide, and most of them I can tie them back to some sense of helping to protect our water resources. So that's certainly a big emphasis. Part of that is because in Alachua County we're really completely dependent on our aquifer, the underground aquifer for our drinking water supply. And so that becomes very important. The issues are changing some, though, from years ago, where we were really focusing more on water quality and the pollution levels in the water. We still have a long way to go in terms of cleaning some of that up, but as an example, we're much more concerned about water conservation these days, and the fact that we're even finding the withdrawals in northeast Florida around Jacksonville, the groundwater pumping in that area is actually starting to have an impact in Alachua County.
Before we leave the water quality issue, though, what are the services you provide? Do you monitor the local water?
Yeah, we do have, and that's really been one of our long-standing programs. We do a lot of water quality monitoring in the county, and that includes our creeks, some of the discharges from our wastewater treatment plants, and groundwater. So we have this, what we call ambient water quality monitoring. That's really important just to kind of get a sense of what's going on with our water bodies. Are they improving? The ones that have had problems, are they getting better? Are they getting worse? So the monitoring is a big part of it.
I know Gainesville has a pretty extensive urban kind of creek just creeks that are running through the heavy congested areas, urban areas. Maybe congested isn't the right word, but what is the state of those things? Do creeks like that have a chance in an urban setting?
Well, I think they do, although in certain urban settings they're in worse shape than others. And I do think in the Gainesville urban area we have a number of creeks. Most people know about Hogtown Creek, but we got some other ones: Possum Creek, Sweetwater Branch, Little Hatchet Creek. And in most cases, our creeks actually flow and disappear underground through sinkholes. That's one of the reasons we want to pay so much attention to them, and that we really are trying so much, city and county, to clean them up, because that discharge into these sinkholes becomes our source of drinking water. And so if the creeks are polluted, it can actually affect our drinking water.
And then, speaking of resource protection, I know you're also involved in the code enforcement or land development arena. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, another part of what we do is what we really call natural resources protection. And this is dealing with making sure that the land development impacts are minimized, or in some cases avoided. And for example, the county, through our comprehensive land use plan and our land development regulations, we have a set of standards and protections. For example, how close you can build to a creek or a lake or the Santa Fe River. We have building setbacks, for example, and those are buffer zones that are really intended to protect those creeks and to create, and those water bodies, to create kind of a cushion, a buffer, so that any impact on the land doesn't directly impact the water. That's an example. We also get involved in habitat protection, and we have in Alachua County, we have endangered and threatened species such as gopher tortoises and other critters that deserve special protection. So some of our standards and best practices are really designed to protecting those habitats.
I know we'll talk about Cabot coppers in more detail in just a moment, but in general, one of the services you provide would be monitoring contaminated sites or getting involved in them?
We do. We have an area called pollution prevention, and really in that area we deal with, for example, through a contract with the state of Florida, we deal with a number of leaky gasoline sites where we've had petroleum contamination get into the groundwater. So we have a number of those sites. We also have some other sites like dry cleaners, for example. The kind of solvents that dry cleaners used in the past for cleaning clothes actually has contaminated some water supply. So we are involved with that. In addition, we have a couple, fortunately not too many, but we got a few large sites that are so big, and one of them we will talk about, the Coppers Cabot site, but we have a couple of sites that are so large that it requires us to work really close with the state and federal agencies. Right. These are kind of, in the case of Coppers Cabot Superfund, it's got national significance.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite services that you provide that I use all the time is the Household Hazardous Waste Center. Mm-hmm. I was there just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, and pulled my car through the drive-through. They descended on my car, unloaded it for me, and I got rid of a bunch of paints and things. Tell us in detail what that center provides.
Yeah. Well, our Household Hazardous Waste Collection Center, which is out at the Levita Brown Environmental Park, that is something that I personally am very proud of. We've got a great staff out there, and actually one of the challenges we have is people come out and they don't want to leave, because we have a very friendly staff, and I guess these days we don't have old general stores where people can sit on the front porch and talk, so they're trying to find other places to have community. So it's a good problem to have, but sometimes we actually have to ask people to leave. But
part of it is that you have so much good stuff that's, one man's trash is another man's treasure, kind of. And
I think that's a good point. We do have what we call our reuse center, which is very, it's not a well-kept secret, but a lot of people do find out about it. And that's a place that citizens can find things like paints and cleaning materials, things that they might have to buy brand new at a store. We have things that are discarded by other people that are moving or for whatever reason don't need it anymore. Perfectly good material that can be reused. So that's a popular site, and we do offer that free. I mean, anybody, it helps the county out too, because what we don't give away free, if we have to stick it in a 55-gallon drum and ship it off or otherwise process it as waste, it's very expensive.
You know, sometimes I think it's easier to say what you don't take at that center than what you do take, but basically all kinds of household chemicals and
Yeah.
old computer equipment.
Yeah, we do. I think the only thing we don't take are radioactive devices, and yeah, that's just an area that we're not really equipped for. But fortunately, most people don't have those type of things. But to be serious, in a university town like this with research and development, you'd be surprised sometimes what ends up in somebody's garage, or somebody passes away and the spouse finds some things that were part of a research project. So we are prepared, and we work with other agencies when we really get something out there that's beyond our means of taking care of.
You know, Chris, one of the programs that you direct that I think has particular significance to me, as Earth Day is kind of right around the corner, is the Alachua County Forever program. And I think it was amazing right from the beginning, but I think something that was particularly amazing about it is, you know, the recent trip to the polls by our citizens that actually renewed, as part of the Wild Spaces Public Places effort, more funding even in these difficult economic times. So can you give us the Reader's Digest version of how Alachua County Forever got started and where it is now?
Well, I think Alachua County Forever, it's a great example of really what was started off as a grassroots effort. And I think what the County Commission did back in the year 2000 is they really listened to the citizens that identified a need for this kind of a program. But it was voted on with basically a landslide vote in the general election of November 2000 to establish this program. And actually the citizens voted to tax themselves, which these days sounds kind of amazing, but they did vote to do that. And I think that just really shows this strong community value that we have in Alachua County for environmental stewardship. And you know, what came out of that was really good support from our county commission. Since then, we've had very consistent support for that program. It has been a challenge with the economic constraints that the county's facing right now, as well as other counties in the state of Florida. We're having to be more creative in terms of how we keep that program going. But like you said, we got another validation of this program in 2008, general election again, November general election, where the Wild Spaces Public Places program, which is really the successor program to Alachua County Forever, again, the citizens voted to tax themselves to pay for this program. But I think what that really reflects is not only the citizens, but the County Commission's recognition that this is just an incredibly important investment. And the return on this investment will only, the value of this program will only become bigger as time goes on. Because we find out a lot of times that we don't miss something until it's not available anymore. So that's been a great program. I've been very lucky. Ramesh Butch, our program manager, I would put him up against anybody in the country. We have very good staff. We have tremendous support from citizens in terms of the Land Conservation Board and friends of, fill in the blank, of these conservation lands.
I hear you talk about green infrastructure sometimes, and I guess that's what these properties are, and just how important that is, not only here locally, but globally.
Yeah. Well, I think green infrastructure, it's one of these terms, you hear a lot of terms these days, sustainable development or green infrastructure, and it can mean a lot of things to different people. In Alachua County, we consider green infrastructure is a framework for valuing the important services that nature provides for people. So it's really looking at the natural systems and how they actually help clean the water, how they sequester carbon, how they help with temperature rises and stuff in terms of cooling, shading, really looking at all those values and recognizing that in many ways, they're a better bang for the buck than the alternative of having to invest in a bunch of concrete and moving parts and energy-intensive treatment systems. So I think we're beginning in the state of Florida, particularly after the bad plumbing that went on in the Everglades in the last century. We've recognized much more that this investment in green infrastructure and really letting nature, for for really free, provide a lot of services that otherwise for us to duplicate those or try to simulate them would cost a lot more money, that it's just a tremendous value. So as time goes on, I think we're getting better at really being able to understand what those values are. Some of them are economic values. Some of them are ones that you can actually put a price tag on. Some of them, obviously, you can't. I mean, the experiences that people get in the woods, some of those are priceless.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think I switched to water quality when you were kind of touching on water conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And how is your office involved just in, you had started to mention the challenges of the aquifer levels going down.
Yeah.
And you know, I know this is a huge issue statewide, and it crosses state lines as well in terms of waters that flow from other places into Florida. So are you all directly involved in looking at this?
Well, we are, and actually one thing that the County Commission did this past year is that they, because of the concern they have, they asked staff to really put together a comprehensive list of what we can do locally in our community to do a better job of conserving water and consuming less of it. So EPD staff is in the process of finishing that report. Actually, it's available on the county's website. There's a draft up that we're asking for public comment. We've also tried to vet it through our citizen advisory committees, the Rural Concerns Advisory Committee, the Environmental Protection Advisory Committee, and the Economic Development Committee, EDAC. Anyway, the idea here is to really identify what can we do locally. There's a lot going on, encouragingly, even in the state legislature this year. It looks like there hopefully will be some good legislation on water, but it's such a contentious issue, and there's so many strong interest groups that are really pushing one way or the other. It's so important for Alachua County and our citizens to really take this seriously and to not let other people plan for us.
Well, and there are so many, I guess, the aquifer doesn't follow the boundaries of Alachua County.
Right.
And when other larger areas are pulling from the aquifer, that affects all of us, I guess. And
that's true.
How does that dialogue work? Is it between you and the water management districts, or?
Yeah. It's a real challenge, to be honest. And I think we're trying to work very closely with the water management districts. In the state of Florida, it's probably a good thing, but we have these unique agencies called water management districts that do look beyond jurisdictional boundaries, and they are really charged with looking at what's good for the entire watershed. The challenge there, though, is the resolving the conflict between a community such as Alachua County's value in trying to protect our springs, for example, and our lakes and our creeks and our rivers from these larger populated areas like Jacksonville and Orlando. And as we go forward, it's going to become a bigger part of the local environmental conversation. The challenge is, what incentives are there for Alachua County if we conserve our water and there's not a good framework with the water management districts and at the state level to somehow reward us for being that way? Right now we're just grappling with how do we go ahead and conserve water and not just make it easier for somebody else to take it. So
Right.
It's a real conundrum that we've got right now. Hopefully in the next few years some of this is going to get sorted out.
You know, just in you saying that, it also made me kind of flash back to water quality issues, because I guess there are a lot of sources that stream in from outside of the county.
Yeah.
And is it as equally complex a kind of a equation to try to deal with that?
Well, I think actually the water quality, the interesting thing in Alachua County, at least surface water, a lot of our creeks actually start in the Gainesville area, and they kind of flow out of Gainesville and they end up in the aquifer, on Paynes Prairie or up at San Falasco, different places. But I think the Santa Fe River is a good example of one where obviously we share boundaries with Columbia and Gilchrist County, and so what happens there may be affected from other jurisdictions. one of the challenging issues is that we've found that some of the water pollution, for example, nitrogen levels in water bodies, surface water bodies, a certain part of that is actually coming from the atmosphere. It's still probably man-made in terms of fossil fuel combustion and the things that get into the air, but we're actually starting to find some of our water pollution is, and mercury is another example, where it's because of deposition from the air. That becomes very difficult because no matter what we do in Alachua County, we can't really control what happens outside the boundaries.
Chris, one of the concrete steps that the Commission took recently was passage of the landscape fertilizer ordinance.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, actually, the County Commission, in the last year, they've adopted 2 countywide ordinances. One deals with landscape fertilizing and trying to reduce the amount of runoff, nutrient runoff from people's yards. The other is landscape irrigation. They also adopted a landscape irrigation code, and they really go together. I kind of need to talk about them together, but one of them is trying to encourage people through better community outreach and really some great work from our County Extension Office and IFAS in terms of helping citizens understand they really don't need as much fertilizer as they think they do, and more is not necessarily better.
Right.
And the same with watering. People really want to have green lawns and really vibrant looking landscaping, but I think the County Extension Office and IFAS have helped us understand that really you can overwater your yard. And when you do that, you're creating more runoff of these pollutants that are getting into our creeks and lakes, and you know, not only causing problems for the natural systems, but really wreaking havoc on our fisheries and some of the reasons people like living in this area.
Right, right. I seem to be stuck on water quality issues, but I know pharmaceuticals and some of the chemicals that are in the personal kind of products that we use, I know those are a big issue for you as well.
Well, they're an emerging issue, and I mean, contrasting that with what we were dealing with at the first Earth Day, going back to that, we have a lot of new challenges. I mean, in some ways it makes my job and the people at EPD, it makes it never a dull moment because we've always got some new issue that we're trying to deal with. But there is this whole new area, they call it emerging contaminants, and it includes personal care products, and it also includes pharmaceutical. Those are the over-the-counter or prescription drugs that we take. And what we're finding is that, first of all, it's really easy for them to get into the environment, into our water systems. Conventional wastewater treatment systems, such as the ones operated by the Gainesville Regional Utilities and our other municipalities, aren't capable of treating those. So a lot of times, if they get into the treatment plant, they are discharged out into the environment. But there's a lot of concerns about those in terms of how they may affect wildlife and fish, and they can cause all kinds of havoc in terms of reproduction of animals. And interestingly, in some cases, the levels that don't really bother humans that are safe for us to take are extremely toxic to other living things. So we're just starting to sort that out. There's no state or federal regulations on that yet, so it's making it quite a challenge. At this point, we're really in the monitoring mode of trying to figure out where this stuff is, but I do think that's an area that we're going to see in the years coming. There'll be a lot of attention to that.
All this press about frogs changing sex and reproducing, is that a result of
That's related
these?
to that. Yeah, it is. And again, we're just starting to figure that out, but it's a challenge, and hopefully we'll be able to straighten that one out like some of the other ones that have been fixed.
Do you monitor the climate in Alachua County?
Well,
or the air quality?
Well, I think we do. I mean, one interesting development, and again, this wasn't back with the first Earth Day, is carbon dioxide regulation. And the U.S. EPA is looking at how they're going to regulate carbon dioxide. The concern is all the fossil fuels that are burnt and for energy sources and otherwise, how that's affecting atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. So that's an area that we are doing what we call greenhouse gas monitoring, kind of looking at collectively what are the sources in Alachua County of carbon dioxide. Mm-hmm. But like we talked about earlier, that's an area where the challenge is that it doesn't begin or end in Alachua County.
Right.
but we certainly can lead by example in terms of things that we can do locally to help show a way out of that concern.
Chris, one of the issues that I know you've had to deal with, and it predates you, I believe, as director of EPD, is the Cabot Copper site. And we could certainly do a whole show on that, but just in the last couple minutes we have, can you kind of tell folks where we are on that?
Well, frankly, that's been a frustrating issue, not only for the county, but I know for our citizens. And the challenge we have is that that's a federally designated Superfund site, which means that the federal government, the U.S. EPA, has the primary jurisdiction. The state of Florida Department of Environmental Protection also has some, but local governments such as Alachua County or County EPD really are pretty much limited in terms of what we can do other than trying to cajole the EPA to really get on it. There's been some recent developments, the announcement that the Copper's active plant is closing. Hopefully that will simplify the cleanup plans and shorten the time frame.
Because they won't have to work around the existing.
Yeah, that was going to be very difficult. But it's an area that, you know, all we can do is keep trying to be kind of a watchdog and let EPA know that this site that's 400 and something miles away from their nearest office needs attention.
Isn't there something coming up this spring? I don't know if it's the final mitigation plan.
There is what they call a record of decision, and basically that's part of this federal process of determining the cleanup strategies, and that is coming up, I think, in the next few months. So we're hoping by this summer we really have a sense of what EPA is going to require the responsible party, which is Beazer East, what they're going to be required to do.
And I know that John Musa on your staff has worked very diligently on this, and we'll be putting up contact numbers for folks that want to get in touch with you.
We're very lucky, Dr. Musa and Robin Hallberg. We got some very sharp technical people that are trying to stay on top of this, and I know EPA has really appreciated their help as well.
Chris, before we go, just to be clear, the county's Environmental Protection Department covers the entire county, does it not? I mean, individual municipalities don't also have EPDs, or do they?
Well, yeah, no, the county's services, most of them do apply within the municipal areas, and that was established by another voter-approved referendum back in 2000. It was a charter amendment to the county's charter that established that the county has jurisdiction to set minimum air and water quality standards within the city. So most of our services, we don't ask whether you're in the city limits or not.
And that explains why you're working on Cabot Coppers, even though it's within the city of Gainesville.
Yeah, that's an example.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming back and seeing us. It's always
okay,
nice to talk
thanks.
to you.